Tony Ferguson versus Anthony Pettis. This was a really last-minute fight because Tony Ferguson was out for months due to his freak knee injury that took him out of his fight with Khabib, which I'm still pretty upset about. But anyways, Tony Ferguson versus Anthony Pettis. Both these guys are mostly strikers. We got Tony Ferguson, who's one of the most unorthodox fighters in the UFC, let alone lightweight. He has great boxing. He's got a big, long, lanky reach. He throws everything. He throws kicks, knees, elbows, spinning back fists and shit. He literally just is very unpredictable. Now, on the other side, you got Anthony Pettis, who's also known to be one of the most unpredictable fighters in the UFC because he comes from this crazy Taekwondo background where he would be throwing jumping spin kicks, heel kicks. He'd be jumping off the cage to throw kicks. He just is a complete kick wizard. Now, he's faced lots of wrestlers over the years, and there's a couple reasons people think that he might not have performed like he used to. It could have been because of USADA. It could have been because his gym basically never advanced him, or everybody else just figured out his style and knew how to beat him. But he hasn't looked like he used to when he was the champion for a long time. I believe he's 3-2 in his last 5. It would be a win, lose, win, lose. Despite all this, Anthony Pettis is only 31 years old, and in his last fight, he actually looked really good. Tony Ferguson, on the other hand, this guy is arguably one of the greatest lightweights there's ever been. The problem is, during his peak years and prime, he never fought any of the best guys. He should have fought Khabib and Conor 1 year, 2 years ago. But since then, he's had multiple knee injuries, one almost career-ending. He's been dropped in several of his last fights. I mean, Lando Venata almost knocked him out 3 times in their fights. And he's also an unorthodox striker, like Anthony Pettis. So that kind of worries me against the Pettis fight because Tony Ferguson struggles against unorthodox fighters, whereas Anthony Pettis struggles against orthodox fighters. So basically, Tony Ferguson struggles against guys like Pettis, and Pettis does well against guys like Ferguson, in my opinion. When it comes to the ground game, Tony Ferguson obviously has higher class Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but as far as actually fighting practicality, Pettis has shown that his ground game is very good because he started out as a wrestler and people were always trying to take him down, hold him against the fence, wrestle with him, and he developed this sick takedown defense. But on top of that, he actually has legitimate submission skills. So his submission skills are actually on point because he's submitted multiple high-level jiu-jitsu artists in the UFC, like Ben Henderson, for example. And he actually uses jiu-jitsu offensively, which is weird because he's a striker. Most strikers won't use jiu-jitsu offensively. They'll stick to one thing and one thing only. That's why Tony Ferguson's so great, because he goes for the finish on the feet and on the ground. But anyways, back to Pettis. Pettis is comfortable in those positions. He has really good scrambles. He's really good off his back, and he's great at getting back to his feet. And Tony Ferguson isn't a power double-leg wrestler. He's not good at smothering or holding people down. His top control is not the best. So Pettis is basically going to be able to get up if Ferguson takes him down, and he's also equally dangerous off his back as well as trying to submit Ferguson offensively. So I'd say it's arguable that they could actually cancel each other out on the ground, and this becomes a striking match on the feet. Now, Ferguson definitely has better boxing than Pettis. He definitely has better heart than Pettis. But Pettis has a granite chin. It is impossible to drop or knock out Anthony Pettis. The dude is just made of some other Mexican rubber out there, and he can't really be finished. Another thing to take into consideration, Tony Ferguson, he's become much more hittable and stationary due to his knee injury because he's less mobile. 2 or 3 of his last 4 fights, he's been dropped and hurt. So I feel like Tony Ferguson 2 or 3 years ago would muck Anthony Pettis, just destroy him. But now I think it's actually a really even fight because he's coming off this injury last minute, and he's facing a guy in Anthony Pettis that's actually a bad stylistic matchup for him. And Pettis is finally hungry again, so he's going to be extra fired up. This is also only a 3-round fight. Tony Ferguson lost 2 of the 3 rounds against Rafael dos Anjos as well as Kevin Lee. So since both of those fights were 5-round fights, Ferguson won rounds 4 and 5 of both those fights and managed to get the decision. But this is only a 3-round fight. So he could easily, due to being a late starter, lose 2 out of 3 rounds to Pettis, and then the bell rings and it's over. So theoretically, Pettis would actually have the advantage of being a 3-round fight because Pettis is known for having bad cardio in the later rounds. Ferguson's known for having good cardio in the later rounds. What I'm saying is Pettis loses fights in the later rounds. Ferguson wins fights in the later rounds. but there aren't going to be any later rounds. So more or less, I have a really weird feeling that despite being an underdog, despite being a guy that's hit or miss his last couple fights, and has likely lost to pretty much majority of the top 5 or top 10 guys at this weight class, I think Anthony Pettis is going to win. I think that for whatever reason, he's just going to catch Ferguson with something really weird. He's going to hurt him with maybe a head kick, a knee, a punch he doesn't see coming, some kind of stepping counter. And Ferguson's going to scramble for a takedown after getting rocked on the feet, and Pettis might either lock up a submission or finish him with strikes. I mean, I like Ferguson. I'm rooting for Ferguson to win because I need to see Ferguson versus Khabib and Ferguson versus Conor. But I think at lightweight, where primes are much shorter than at other weight classes, I think Ferguson is just a little bit too depleted, and Pettis is going to be a nasty matchup for him that despite Ferguson being arguably the number 1 or 2 guy in the world, the only guy in the top 10 that gives him this much trouble is Anthony Pettis. Just doesn't really make sense. Be sure to let me know what you guys think about the UFC 229 fights, and if there's any videos you guys want me to make in the future, comment them below. Peace out.